we do not need slides for the intervention. I apologize that I was not clear in my communication. Yeah.
Okay, because yeah, I got another mail saying some sending for some PPTs, and that's why I thought it may be a 3 minutes presentation. So yeah, I think that's why I had sent the slides, but it's all right. I mean, yeah,
I will include that in your report, Prof. Yeah?
Okay, okay.
In the report, we will include.
Okay, yeah, sure, sure.
Thank you so much for making time to do the slides. Yeah, we have Professor Johnny Chan with us.
Okay.
Yeah? He has just joined us.
Hello.
Hello, hi, Professor Johnny Chan. And we also have Professor Rajib Shaw. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Hello, Professor Rajib Shaw. Yeah.
Yes, yes. How are you?
And
Good.
Good, thank
Good
you.
evening, good
We have
afternoon, good evening.
everybody here. Yeah. We're going to start shortly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Prof, we admitting attendees now.
Okay. The audience is trickling in now.
Should I start with my closing remark?
Oh, no. I can't wait for the closing remarks, Professor Rajib, but I hope you can do it after some details are sorted out. I heard you have been doing 3 already.
Yeah, Qunli, how are you?
Good. How are you, Professor Rajib Shaw?
Yeah, we are meeting almost every day.
Yes, yes. I heard you have done 3 closing remarks.
We had one yesterday, yes.
Yeah, we had yesterday. So,
Professor Chan, I'll come to you after we take the comments of Professor Manju during the discussion. Professor Chan, yeah?
Yes.
So do we wait for Riyanti? She will be here at 5 on the dot, she says. So I think we'll just wait for her to join us.
Prof, we are live on Facebook.
Okay. So welcome everybody to the SEADPRI Forum 2021. We are waiting for a couple of people to join us here who are speaking from the panel. But at the same time, I'm given to understand we are getting everybody into the room. So our registration is about 100. So please bear with us while we sort out the logistics. Perhaps Dr. Fasha, you can put in a message in the chat that we will start shortly.
Joy, I did not know you are a good musician. You are playing live?
Oh no, that is Dr. Fasha doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Riyanti is here. Great. Okay. So welcome everybody. I think we can start now because we have all the key people in place. So this is the forum on risk science for resilient cities from concept to action. I'm Joy Jacqueline Pereira with the Southeast Asia Disaster Prevention Initiative of University Kebangsaan Malaysia. better known as SEADPRI. I'm also a fellow of the Academy of Science Malaysia and a director of the Asian Network on Climate Science and Technology. So today's forum is actually something that we at SEADPRI do on an annual basis. It's a flagship event that started when we were established a decade ago, and as a center at University Kebangsaan Malaysia. And we, for your information, we are an IRDR Center of Excellence on disaster risk and climate extremes, with a particular focus on Southeast Asia. So this year, the forum is very special to us because this is an opportunity for us to, as a IRDR Center of Excellence, to provide inputs to the global research agenda on disaster risk reduction, which is being developed and led by the IRDR with inputs from the UNDRR, with co-leadership from UNDRR and the ISC, which is the International Science Council. And we have a chance here to actually provide, all of us here, to provide our inputs to this agenda, research agenda that's developing. And you will hear more about this from the keynote speaker. And the plan here is that we will start with some background on disaster risk, so we all have a common understanding on what is, on risk science. What's the common understanding? We get into the same page, and we have a keynote speaker from UNDRR, Dr. Jenty Kirsch-Wood, with us, who's made time to share this understanding with us. And then we will move on to hear the process of how the agenda is, the global research agenda is developing, and the kind of teams that are being proposed. And we will then have a panel who will give inputs, so we can capture the inputs. But at the same time, all of you from the region, you are so welcome to put into chat your questions, which will be read out by my joint moderator, Dr. Zarina, my colleague, and from SEADPRI, who happens to also be a subject topic leader at the Asian Network on Climate Science and Technology, working on climate and disaster resilience. So we at SEADPRI, we are so proud and privileged today to be collaborating with the UNDRR Asia Pacific Science Technology Advisory Group. The chair is here, Professor Rajib, who's based in KO. And we are also proud that we are working with the Asian Network on Climate Science and Technology. My co-director is here, Professor Johnny Chan, and also our special topic group leader based in New Delhi, Professor Manju Mohan. And we are also happy that we have with us the UNESCO Youth and Young Professionals as a joint organizer, Professionals on Disaster U-Inspire Alliance. And we have the dynamic Dr. Rahma here, who's the secretary of U-Inspire Alliance. And we are happy to be working with the International Science Council Regional Office for the Asia Pacific, Professor Emeritus Mazlan Othman, who is the director, is here. And not least but last is the Academy of Sciences Malaysia, specifically the Academy's ASM Disaster Risk Reduction Research Alliance. So we have some members, this is a jointly organized initiative as well. So our objective here today is threefold. We are going to be drawing on the presentations of our two keynote speakers and the panel remarks from the panels. And what we want to do is to get an understanding of risk science. We want an understanding of the regional landscape in a changing climate. And we want to identify the priorities for risk science in the context of cities. And we want to explore means of implementation, specifically and including drawing on the tremendous energy of our youth and young professionals in the region. And they are really dynamic, and I'm so excited for our region to have so much of capacity out there among our youth and young professionals. So we are, for your information, we are recording the session, and your inputs today will be documented and channeled to the IRDR as an input to the global research agenda on DRR. And on that note, I would like to invite Dr. Riyanti Djalante, who is chair of the IRDR steering committee. Dr. Riyanti was previously from the United Nations University, and she is now with the ASEAN Secretariat. She has previously contributed as a lead author to the IPCC special report on 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming. And we are so happy and excited to have her here to deliver the opening remarks. The platform is yours, Dr. Riyanti.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Prof. Joy, for this invitation. I would say also greetings to Honorable Professor Sharifah Zarina, Chair of IRDR ICoE-SEADPRI-UKM, distinguished guest participants, ladies and gentlemen. So allow me to give my remarks on the SEADPRI Forum 2021, Risk Science for Resilient Cities from Concept to Action, in my capacity as the chair of the scientific committee of IRDR. So the emerging global risk landscape of varying pandemic, climate change, social and financial crisis, inequalities, vulnerabilities pose new challenge for disaster risk reduction. The trend is for more severe and more complex risks with cascading and systemic impacts. Rapid political, social, and technological development, in addition to climate change, also contributing to the shiftings of this risk landscape. So IR Integrated Research on Disaster Risk, or IRDR, is a decade-long research program co-sponsored by the International Science Councils and the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. So it's a global multidisciplinary approach to dealing with the challenges brought by disasters in order to mitigate the impacts and also improve related policy making mechanism. So IRDR comprises of the co-sponsors of the scientific committee, international centers of excellence such as SEADPRI, and the young scientist programs, which many of you are attending here. So it has been operating under the science plan for IRDR published in 2008. So the complexity of this task such that it requires full integration of research expertise from natural, socio-economic, health and engineering sciences, as well as policy making, coupled with understanding on the role of communication and public and political responses to reduce risk. So yes, so in this context, we have IRDR have endeavored to set up a process to develop also global agenda for risk science that is informed and shaped by multiple perspectives to guide international research, scientific collaboration, and funding to strengthen the impact of science on risk management and risk reduction. And this is, I think, basically what we aim to discuss today. So there are 8 science agenda themes that are identified in the forthcoming global risk agenda. 1 is on understanding risk, 2 on addressing inequality, injustices, and marginalization, 3 to enable transformative governance and action to reduce risk, 4 on measurement to help drive progress, 5 on understanding the implication of new thinking on hazard, 6 harness technologies, innovation, data, and knowledge management for risk reduction, 7 foster risk multi-stakeholder collaboration for solutions to risk challenges, and 8 support regional and national science and knowledge for policy and action. So we call for your participation to give valuable insights on how this broadened scope for IRDR can be achieved. So finally, I would like to highlight the need to strengthen capacity of conducting and delivering science in the Asia-Pacific region, particularly in Southeast Asia, as one of the most at-risk regions to disasters and climate change. So the science needs to be done from the people, by the people, and to the people in this region. And to do this, we would like to also particularly highlight the role of the youth, young scientists, young practitioners in science, engineering, technology, and innovation, particularly in disaster management and risk reduction matters. And hence their voices and capacities needs to be nurtured, consulted to, and eventually be the deciding actors toward current and future policy. So let me end my remarks here. Thank you very much for this opportunity given, and I wish for a successful and invigorating discussion in this SEADPRI Forum 2021, Risk Science for Resilient Cities from Concept to Action. So thank you very much, Professor Joy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Riyanti, for that very nice opening that stresses the link between disaster risk reduction and climate change, and how in Southeast Asia, we are particularly vulnerable. And one of the solution spaces means for the solution is through our youth and young professionals who we look to in this respect. With that, we now, ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to our first keynote on the concept and practice of risk science. And we have the privilege to have with us Dr. Jenty Kirsch-Wood, Chief of the Global Risk Analysis and Reporting Section of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And we will be benefiting from her over 2 decades of experience in the UN, working in West Asia, in Southeast Asia, in Eastern Europe and Africa. She knows us well. Yeah, she knows us well, and she knows what she's talking about when you in risk science. So it is with great pleasure that I hand the platform over to Dr. Kirsch-Wood to share her immense knowledge and take on risk science with us.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And I hope very much, I'm a little bit both honored and humbled by being able to address this very distinguished forum of scientists. I myself am more of a practitioner, but as the kind introductory words outlined, I've worked for many years quite globally on disaster and climate change issues within the United Nations system, but also within civil society and as an advisor to governments. And so the issues that we will talk today about, and which I hope we can engender a lively discussion around, are very close to both my personal and my professional interests. Let me just make sure that I'm able to share my screen. Of course, when the moment comes, it's always a little more tricky. Fantastic. Are you able to see?
Yes, Doctor.
Fantastic, great. So what I would like to talk a little bit today is the concept and practice of risk science, and the sense that over the years, while there's quite a broad agreement that the concept of risk and hazard, vulnerability, and exposure is quite well understood, in reality, the complexity behind that and the ability to manage risk effectively is a topic that has really been evolving, and we see as we enter a more complex global age just how critical this is to the future of sustainable development. Of course, we all know that you can look at this very simple equation of risk as being a function of the hazard. Is the ground shaking? Is that an earthquake? The vulnerability, is my building safe? Was I able to afford to repair the roof? Was I able to put in a strong structure? And exposure, are my children or my family still inside, still remains valid. But what we also see is that over time, the recognition is that risk is much more than that very simple equation. It's about understanding small and large scale events. It's about understanding frequent, but also the infrequent events that can drag back development slowly, It's about looking at sudden and slow onset disasters, those that are natural but also man-made hazards such as chemical spills. And it's looking not only at traditional climate-related or weather-related risks, but also at environmental, technological, and biological hazards and risks. And so as we look forward under the framework of the Global Sendai Framework for Action around disaster risk reduction, it is very, very multi-hazard by nature, and it affects development at all levels. And that understanding of disaster risk as it's exemplified in the Sendai framework is part of a longer tradition. Essentially, when the field of disaster risk reduction emerged in the 1960s and 70s, you really saw it focusing mainly on sole hazard approaches. Perhaps to oversimplify a little bit, the idea was if you could know your flood risk or you could know your earthquake risk, the solutions would take care of themselves. But unfortunately, we began to learn by the 70s and 80s in the academic disciplines that actually the social dimension of disasters was critical. That if you didn't understand who was most vulnerable, if you didn't understand where the economy was affected, where individual vulnerabilities or gender or other structural inequality came in, it was very hard to effectively manage disasters. And by the turn of the millennium, the thinking had even moved further, which was that not only was vulnerability something that needed to be looked out for, but also that vulnerability was actually a social construction. That essentially there were a lot of issues around governments and governance, but also in terms of how societies organize themselves that had a big impact on whether or not you were really able to manage risk in a multi-hazard way. And it's a challenge for all countries. This is not a topic that divides the developed and quote the developing world. It's a concept that I think is equally applicable in any country as we see today. And so more recently with the Sendai framework, you saw an inculcation of the idea of really risk as being a systemic issue that needed to be managed, really looking across a wide spectrum, both of how societies interact, of how technology and cultures interact. We face new challenges like climate change, which are really showing how our personal actions and our communal actions have a huge impact on how we reduce disasters and how we manage risk as we move forward. And so it's very true that those three components of the context of disaster risk in terms of hazards, exposure, and vulnerability are still very, very accurate. But it's also important to see what's driving them. What is happening with our hyper-connected financial system, with increasing poverty, with environmental degradation, or poorly managed urban development? What is driving those parts of that risk equation? And how are those manifesting in things like food insecurity or failing infrastructure? And we see that this thinking has come very much also into a recognition of the synergies and the integration of managing climate change risk and disaster risk. This slide actually comes from the IPCC, and what it looks at is that you cannot manage the complexity of our future climate without understanding those same components of vulnerability, exposure, and of course, hazards. So how are we doing? 5 years into, more than 5 years into Sendai, and after many, many years of looking at disasters, well, globally, we face a challenging picture. In terms of managing vulnerability, we've made huge strides. There are big decreases in the number of people who are killed in extreme events per capita across populations, particularly in some countries in your region that are highly, highly impacted. And so huge successes in places like Bangladesh, Indonesia, Japan, I believe also Malaysia, in reducing disaster deaths and in having effective early warning systems. This is fantastic progress. But it's also clear that vulnerability with demographic changes and rising populations and new types of risk isn't overall decreasing. Similarly, with urbanization, population movements, exposure is also increasing. We've got more people living in unsafe locations. And of course, perhaps the biggest moving of the goalposts is something that is now taking a lot of global precedence for good reason, which is that for the first time in human history, we now see that hazards themselves are increasing. We used to at least believe that that the flood was not something that we were able to control. We could control how it impacted people. But now with climate change, we even realize that that social construction of risk is even applying to hazards, as climate change is making extreme events both more frequent and more intense in many, many parts of the world. And to add to this, we now more and more recognize that how we manage systems, not only parts of the disaster equation, is also affecting whole systems. And COVID is a beautiful example of this. What began as a health crisis and an issue to do with a public health issue has now spurned into something that is affecting every aspect of our lives, from agriculture, food security, economic poverty reduction, to issues of privacy and IT rights. And that if we don't manage the COVID crisis effectively, we may even face a moment where you have system breakdown for a period. This is a new level of global interconnectedness and a new era for disaster risk reduction. But it means for you as young scientists that you have both a lot of challenges, but also incredible opportunities as we move into this next phase of Sendai framework implementation. So if I had to sum up this first part of the presentation, I would say this topic of risk science, well, it's complex and varied, and you can't you can't boil it down to one particular angle or one particular way of approaching risk. But that in itself is an opportunity and part of the learning about how effectively we can work together to better reduce risk. And it's certainly not a reason to become despondent. And it means that for those people listening today, some of your work may focus more on issues like building stressors or engineering or technical solutions, and looking at how we can build stronger buildings or safer buildings, or how we can tackle global warming. And you are central to this discussion about how to effectively manage risk. There will also be people here who maybe are experts on reservoir depletion or epidemics or chemical outbreaks, or even those who look at this from more of the ethical angles or the social impacts, or how different types of issues like displacement or migration might be impacting the risk equation. And the very strong message that I'd like to give is that all of you have a role in helping to manage risk. And we hope very much that by interconnecting and drawing on this global experience and using technology and using forums like today, we can help find more effective responses. So, young scientists, there is not one way to practice risk science. So instead, I'd just like to spend a couple more minutes highlighting three very simple takeaways for you to think of as you move out to help create the sustainable development of the future. And the first one is that, perhaps I'm biased in this, but I think increasingly we are seeing that learning how to manage risk is perhaps the biggest question of our time. And I say that because if you look at so many of the key challenges in our societies, how we manage risk in how we design our cities, in how we deal with allocating resources like water, or how we manage the impacts of climate change. If we look at it from engineering, how we begin to enable more people to live safely in cities as the world urbanizes. But if we also look at how sustainable development or topics like food security and agriculture need to be taken forward, and even pandemics need to be managed, it's clear that the basics are already there, but what is accelerating or what is slowing down development often has to do with how risks are managed and how efficiently systems can evolve, but also how resilient systems are. And that doesn't matter if you're studying engineering or you're studying agriculture, or you're studying water. If you have a solution, but it's not able to deal with shocks, we see more and more that that is actually what determines how effective it really is over time. And so what I'd like to say is that when you're looking really at risk-informed sustainable development, you need to look quite broadly. Yes, be specialist in your area. Yes, dig deep, but also think about how different parts of the social science and hard science agenda can strengthen an understanding of risk-informed sustainable development. Natural sciences, technology, applied science, human social science, all of these are integral to making sure that solutions are really effective. And that leads me into my second point, which is that essentially technology will only get us so far. And it is exciting. We live in an unprecedented moment. When I began to work on climate change issues about 15 years ago, a little bit more, it was really difficult. I remember I looked first, I was at the time working on humanitarian operations, and I was asked to do analysis on the humanitarian implications of climate change. And when I looked, I said, yes, there were going to be huge humanitarian implications of climate change, and we see that beginning to manifest itself. But it was also very difficult. When we looked at what the technology was that could have controlled greenhouse gases, it simply didn't exist. The quality of solar panels, the ability to change and to transform electrical systems, the ability to mitigate climate change, the technology was simply not there. That's not the case now. A solar panel costs a fraction of what it did even 5 years ago. We've got amazing solutions. And of course, we need more. So I don't want to underscore the importance of technology and the importance of hard science and engineering and technological solutions. But it's also true that that will only get you so far. And the fact that now those technical solutions are available and are becoming online, but the fact that perhaps pace of using them is not close enough, is not fast enough, that teaches us something else. It teaches us that if you only look at the technological solution without thinking about how it relates to governments and people and individuals and economies and how we organize ourselves as societies, you will have a very hard time getting the transformational change that you want. So technology is important, but it's not the only solution. And the other reason to think a little bit more broadly and perhaps reach out to the people in the chat box and learn about those from other areas as you look at becoming risk professionals moving forward is that diverse groups of problem solvers have statistically outperformed the best individuals at solving complex problems. Complex problems like the challenges that we face today need diverse solutions. And the reason for that is that diverse groups got stuck less, and they tend to come up with more innovative solutions, and they get stuck less often than those who just think from one perspective. So as we move forward, it's not a luxury to reach out and think systemically or try to look at a multidisciplinary approach. It's a requirement to really trying to create an effective and resilient solution. So as we move forward, I think it's a good moment to move even beyond thinking about interdisciplinary contact, which is of course important, where the social scientists can connect with the engineers and can connect with the economists to really create solutions that are able to be sustainable and really implemented. But it's also an opportunity to think about how we learn and almost to look at transdisciplinary research that can find new ways of bringing in citizens' voices, indigenous wisdom, and to think about how we can really have joined up thinking that not only finds solutions, but makes them usable within societies. And then my final point is that you cannot eliminate risk entirely. And I think this is very important because we need to have resilience. The photograph on the left is actually apparently from the Titanic, a ship that was built about 100 years ago and sailed from the UK to America and was supposedly unsinkable. And because it was considered unsinkable and not at risk, it didn't have enough lifeboats when it struck an iceberg with huge fatalities. And so I would just stress that as we move forward and we're looking for solutions, there needs to be flexibility in systems. There needs to be an ability for them to adapt and evolve, and also to recognize that we cannot eliminate risk, but we can very much move from a focus of just trying to respond and eliminate one disaster to actually an approach that helps us prevent risk where we can, reduce it, manage it as best we can, but also get better at living with uncertainty and living with risk, because this is going to be essential. As we look forward, we will not be able to perfectly predict exactly where disasters hit. We will not be able to predict exactly what the impacts of sea level rise will be. So we need to build systems that are able to buffer and be more responsive, more resilient, and much better at learning faster and more effectively. That's an incredibly exciting opportunity, but it's also one that will require different types of teamwork and learning and flexibility to really be effective. And the final point I'd like to make is that I hope I've underscored to you that risk science is fundamental to addressing the climate crisis. It's not an add-on, it's not integrated, it is fundamental to addressing the climate crisis, and it is also fundamental, therefore, to achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. We simply will not be able to continue to develop and to provide more people with safer, respectful, dignified livelihoods, and to see human development progress effectively if we are not getting better at managing risk overall. And so this is my final slide, and I hope that you see it as a beautiful flower of opportunity. We have incredible capacity, incredible ingenuity, incredible technology that can help fuel future risk-informed sustainable development. We have legislative frameworks, we have governments and citizens around the world interested and eager to act, and we have real opportunities to look across all of the aspects and all of the different disciplines of the Sustainable Development Goals to make that a reality. But it will only happen if young scientists and old scientists like many here today really begin to work together and think holistically about risk, look for those opportunities, and most of all, act and connect and bring in the next generation of the risk agenda that is going to be able to manage the climate crisis and better take into account systemic holistic risk. Thank you very, very much. It's a real honor to be here, and I look very much forward to a lively discussion. Over to you.
Thank you so much for that inspiring talk, Dr. Jenty. And I really enjoyed that broad perspective on risk science that you presented as a function of hazards and vulnerability and exposure that leads to cascading impacts, and how it has to be systematically managed, taking into account interdisciplinary inputs, practitioners' experiential knowledge, and community engagement. And the three, learning how to manage risk and recognizing the limits of technology, how we need a combinations of governance and political will. Those are important messages that we really need to take to heart. And I like the way you finish off by saying we can't eliminate risk entirely. We need to learn how to live with uncertainty and risk, and also left us with a reminder that the other side of the coin is the opportunity. Yeah, that was a nice way of finishing. So thank you so much for that. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, moving on to our second keynote, ladies and gentlemen, we have Professor Qunli Han, who is the Executive Director of the IRDR International Program Office based in Beijing. And Professor Han was the Secretary of the Man and Biosphere Program at UNESCO and Director of the Division of Ecological and Earth Sciences for a spell. He has served in West and Central Asia during his time in UNESCO, and Professor Han will be laying out the process in developing the global research agenda for us today. And I look forward to his talk, and I suggest that you listen carefully because he's going to give us pointers on how we're going to make our interventions today, and so that we can, so that the interventions are effective and would help to develop a very a global research agenda that is relevant to us in the region. I now hand the platform to you, Professor Han.
Thank you, Professor Pereira. I will share the screen with the help of the PowerPoint. I think it's on the screen now. Well, thank you very much for this very important opportunity, particularly to Professor Pereira and your colleagues, your team, to organize this IRDR pre-session for the IRDR conference that to be held from 8 to 10 in June. In fact, this is the fourth pre-sessions for the conference. And all the four are going to look at the research agenda, the global research agenda for DRR. So I will, in this presentation, to follow Dr. Jenty's the talk, very enlightening talk, I will cover the few points, the context and the rationale of the current research agenda, the risk landscape that with some of this, the features that changes, the preparation process so far, the current draft, which we will highlight the research themes, then close by looking for the specific advice from the participant of this meeting. That has been IRDR Scientific Committee has developed a few questions to facilitate this process. As you know, you all know that IRDR is a scientific program started in 2010 under the International Science Council, at that time of the International Science Council and the International Social Science Council. And then the UNDRR at that time, now is renamed as UNDRR, with some support from the Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Association of Science Technology. The overall mission, this as a pioneering, quite pioneering the initiative, the mission of IRDR is to develop a transdisciplinary, multi-sectoral the alliances for in-depth and practical disaster risk reduction research studies, and also for the implementation of evidence-based disaster risk policies and practices. Now, if you look at this, on the top is understanding the risk by integrated research. So 10 years after this, I think if you look at the new research agenda, this will still stay on the top. In fact, this is also the first priority for the Sendai framework. That is that we have to use all the means, all the powers and the brains to understand the risk or the vulnerability, the exposure, hazard, then from the aspect of natural sciences, social economic aspect, health and engineering aspect. Now, IRDR in the 10 years span, last 10 years, thanks to the effort of the scientists and many individuals and institutions, has made its contribution to the shaping of the Sendai framework from the scientific point of view, but also itself has been repositioned and adjusting itself over time. And the last, the action plan was 2018 and to 2020. During this period, I think the message and the voice becomes stronger. That is all the work related with the disaster risk reduction must go also in line with the 2030 agenda, such as the SDGs, the Paris Agreement on Climate, and the new urban agenda, etc. as has been illustrated by Dr. Jenty. Now, this simple diagram of IRDR structure, what stay in the central, the blue part is the scientific committee. Now is led by Dr. Riyanti. And then the International Program Office is the small office in Beijing, which used to be headed by Dr. Rajib Shaw, and then now is by myself with a small team.
Professor Han?
Yeah.
Have we lost Professor Han?
Yes, Prof.
Okay. He will rejoin. Can we?
Professor Han? Yep. I think Professor Han trying to say something.
I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we seem to have lost Professor Han, but what we can do is perhaps we can upload the backup slides that we have, and maybe can I call upon either Dr. Riyanti or Professor Rajib to step in and just take us through the document? I understand both of you are also part of the...
I think Riyanti knows it much better than me, so I give it
Yes,
to
Dr. Riyanti, can we call upon you as a backup? Yeah. Is this the backup slide?
Yes, yes, Prof.
Yeah, yeah.
If Riyanti is not there, maybe I can explain a little bit about this.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, sorry, means I'm not as eloquent as Qunli, but this IRDR, because I was also heading the IPO before Qunli, so it is with co-sponsors, Science Council and UNDRR. And what you see here is what we call the host, which is the Chinese Academy of Science and Chinese Association of Science and Technology, and then Chinese Academy of Science. And then it has a scientific committee, international program office, and the most important part of this IRDR network is what you were seeing there in the what is written like IRDR NC. NC means National Committee, ICoE means International Center of Excellence, then IRDR Working Group, and the Young Scientist Program. I think this particular network is the key thing IRDR has developed over the last 10 years or so. Next slide, please. Okay, so IRDR compilation. So this is an document which the IRDR has been bringing. So it will be like the 10 years of legacy. There have been quite a bit of interesting work. Initially more on the science related work, but then gradually we also shifted from doing pure science to more on the science advocacy, talking to different types of forum, talking to different level of regional and national, as well as at the international platforms. So I think one of the key focus of IRDR has been shifting from doing pure science to also science advocacy and combining these two together. So this particular document will be released in the conference, IRDR, the final conference, which will be organized just 1 month from now, 6th, 7th, and 8th of June. Originally, we were planning to hold it in Beijing, but now it will be online. And possibly it will be also a blended program. So some of the Chinese participants will be in Beijing, but others will be online. Next slide, please. So I think the science, the context and rationale of this whole document, what you see here, this was a pre-conference of global platform, which was organized by STAG, UNDRR STAG, Science Technology Advisory Group, and also IRDR. You see Madam Mami Mizutori, SRSG of UNDRR, and also the IRDR Science Committee Chair, as well as Science Council, that time President, and all the other people. So it was actually, we had the Science and Policy Forum for implementation of Sendai framework. So there we try to contextualize the global science and technology roadmap. And then that was actually one of the starting point of this particular document. And then there was another very interesting initiative, which was the review of the hazard terminology. Possibly some of the audience like who are participating, you possibly have joined this one. So this hazard terminology, like it was almost a, I would say, close to 6 to 8 months exercise with many stakeholders. And there is a new publication now, like different types of hazard. Now more like 360 plus hazard divided into like whether it is geological, then biological, then meteorological. There are so many different categorizations. So I think that's also one of the very interesting document. And so this actually sets the context of the roadmap and the future science technology, the research agenda. The next slide, please. So yes, so this I think it's UNDRR's famous document, like how we are trying to have synergies with different groups, and after the Sendai framework, then growing to 2020, 2030 and beyond. So one of our key target is the risk-informed sustainable development. So they are possibly the synergies of disaster risk reduction, sustainable development, Paris Climate Agreement. We have already discussed it. Jenty has very eloquently pointed out some of these. I won't repeat that. Next slide, please.
Prof, we have Prof Han back in the...
Okay, over to you, Qunli. I was just filling the gap.
Prof Han?
Professor Han, can you hear us? I think I'll have to ask you to soldier on, Professor Rajib. Thank you so much for demonstrating the resilience of Asia.
Qunli, is it okay I go, or we can't see him? I think he's there. I see the name.
But he's having connection problems. Yeah. We have already told him to step in the minute he comes in and he gets a good sound, good connection.
Okay. So just let me continue, and whenever he's there, I will stop. Let me know. So I think this is the famous quote of SRSG that it was in GARD 2019. I think, and we all faced, I think this was 2019, but possibly in 2021, we are facing this more strongly. that this new risk, and it's ever changing. It's not only now the climate change, but there are also biological hazards. So I think the risk is really getting systemic. So I will come back to this issue a little bit later in my closing remarks as well. But I think the systemic risk is getting, like earlier it was more conceptualized, but now I think it is more reality. So we need to address that very strongly. So we need to think about the future risk landscape. And that's one of the key points of our the new research agenda. Next slide, please. So yes, these are some of the photographs. I actually listened to Qunli yesterday, so I know this one that he took this photo last year in China, and like how the infrastructure damage. And I think there are many of this type of photographs or this type of issues where disasters are affecting. We have the rain, we have the flood, we have the landslide. So there are 2 or 3 disasters are coming together, what we call the cascading risk, and that has been quite prominent in many parts of the world, of course, many parts of the Asia Pacific. Next slide, please. Yes, last year also we experienced this one. It was a very strong or very bad, I will say, forest fire in west coast of US, in Blue Mountain in the UNESCO World Heritage Site. And also, if you remember, in 2019, we had very bad forest fire in Australia. So I think, again, all these different types of disasters are coming more complex, and one with in conjunction with others, so becoming more cascading. Next slide, please. And yes, Qunli.
Maybe Professor Han tried to speak.
Yes.
But that's okay.
Okay, I still means when I hear him speaking, and I will stop. So just continuing that, the sandstorm, like this year, this is from Beijing. So this year sandstorm also has been very strong, very bad already. Next slide, please. Yes, now I see Qunli. So over to you, Qunli. I was just filling the gap.
Yes, do you hear me?
Very well.
Yes.
Very
Yes, very well.
Yes, very well.
I was definitely not as eloquent as you, so but I try to fill the gap. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you did perfect well. Thank you so much. My apologies. Now just to continue that, then the Texas, the great failure and the snowstorm, and many people were suffering. Then next slide, please. And the biological risk that has been seen in the Huangshan World Heritage Site, which used to be, has been for decades, the top concern is the forest fire, because once you have the forest in the landscape like this, it's very difficult to stop it. And then the value of World Heritage was lost. But now the top concern is this risk of pine wood panel nematode, that the insect that may threat this natural beauty. Next one. And of course, the pandemic. The pandemic has been such a disaster to all the human beings. Next one. It is not about the losing the human life, but it's about the impact to all the other dimensions of the human societies. Next one. Such as the loss of job opportunities. The IRO's estimation in September last year, it's a third quarter, there's a loss of 12.1%, or 345 million full-time equivalent jobs. And the indirect economic loss is very hard to estimate. Next one. This the access is the insurance company has made the survey. Then on the public concerns on the risk, emerging risk, As you can see, the blue lines are the 2019 and the red lines are 2020. And the public concern and perception has changed that the pandemic and infectious disease has come really on the top, still followed by the climate change and the cybersecurity, etc. Next one, next one, next one. So these are the changes. Next one, please. World Economic Forum has also made its own survey and assessment. The short-term risk, as seen by people, the top 10 are the infectious diseases, livelihood crisis, extreme weather events, and cybersecurity failure, and digital inequality, and so on. Next one. This is the interesting diagram I think many people are familiar with. It shows the web of risk and the risk drivers. And this is just about risk. And we see the with the top 10 risk. Then this risk once become a real disaster, then it will have further complications, the cascading effect. So this really shows that we are dealing with something which is really connected and complex. Next one. Now, the new report, hazard definition classification, the report published by UNDRR and IIC last year in July, that has come up with many new hazard, and actually the original idea, as you remember, Professor Rajib, that was to have something not as a hazard definition, but a risk definition classifications. But I think as the first step is moved to the new category of hazard definitions and the classifications. This provides quite important input for the new research agenda. Next one. Then this slide is from UNDRR. Dr. Jenty has showed that this, as we can see, is really for all work in the risk science field, we see a paradigm shift from disaster management to disaster response, which are still extremely important, but more the effort will move to the risk prevention and living with uncertainty. Personally, I feel as the IPO staff, I see next one, we should probably be more active than living with, but managing the uncertainty. Next one. So this is the third part of the briefing about the preparation process. So with all these issues now, the UNDRR and IRDR under the ISC started this work last year from the January, and it established the main the structure is the establishment of the core group. Basically, it's for the expert for drafting the document, and then expert review group. In total, there are about 70 experts have been engaged in this process. Next one. Next one. And we expect, together with our pre-con session here, in June, 8th to June, the IRDR conference, we expect to endorse the draft research agenda. Then IC and the UNDRR will make further consultations and consolidations after June meeting. Next one. The current draft is like this. Is the draft under review. I have the introduction, the development process of the research agenda, and give the reason, more specific reason in text why the new agenda is needed. Then the disaster risk, the field, the recent evolution and emerging issues. Then the probably most important part is the research priorities within the global risk landscape. For this one, we will really hope to have a consensus of the scientific communities and disaster risk management communities. And because we hope that from there, we can make a more detailed design of the implementation programs. Then implementing the agenda is also provided. And for the time being, the document on that part is still under working. And we expect that the contributions from you all. Next one. So I will go very quickly. I think, in fact, Dr. Riyanti at in her opening speech already featured this, but I'll just go quickly. This is already in the document. That the same one is understanding risk creation and perpetuation in the contemporary risk landscape. And the same too is addressing inequalities and injustice and marginalization. Next one. This has been in the document accompanied by key questions such as how can research to inspire better work to understand the complex interconnections and systemic compound cascading risks and so on. Next one. This is the questions on the question 2. Next one. Next one. The same 3 is enable transformative governance and action to reduce risk. This is, I think, all of us see this already in the Sendai, but still there are much more effort is needed. And the theme 4 is to see how we can take measures to help drive the progress. Next one. Next one. These are the key questions. Already these are put online by ISC on the website to cast the opinions. Next one, please. Next one. Theme 5 is understanding implication of new thinking of hazard. And the theme 6 is the harness technologies, innovations, data, knowledge for risk reduction. This one, the theme 5 is really about this hazard or risk definitions, this new category report. Then the technology part is bring us enormous new opportunities, but also the new concerns. So these are the 2 important things that we need to look at. Next one. Next, yes, this is the referring to the report. Next one, please. Yeah. And here, I think it's important to see the technology change. In fact, in the June conference, we hope to have a very strong speaker from this technology field to give a talk. Next one, please. This is the last 2. The same 7 is foster interdisciplinary multi-stakeholder collaboration for solutions. And then the same 8 is support regional and national science to policy and action process. And in fact, the same 8 is extremely important for all the ICoEs, national commissions, and the regional networks as a stack, because we need to give the guidance and advice to UNDRR and ISC, as well as the IRDR, how to address these issues. Next one, please. Next one. Next one. Maybe I can just draw you to the one line in the document, which I think is a mission. It says that it's about the transitioning to a peaceful, safer, equitable, and sustainable world in the context of DRR. I like this the word of safer very much, because next one, what we are talking about as for sustainability, sustainable development, if we look at the ICDGs, what we do in the disaster risk reduction work, and is highly relevant to this global agenda. Like the number 2, zero hunger is about the food security. Number 3, good health is about the health of human lives and the security of lives, safety of lives. Number 6, water is about water security, about energy, about the city, sustainable cities, about the climate actions, about the biodiversity, and so on. Next one, please. So quite a large number of ICDGs are actually related to the safety, which is another side of the ball of the disaster risk or risk reduction. Next one. So the per sessions, we have, no, next one, just have the full list. We already have the one from the ICoE from Hong Kong, and Professor Rajib Shaw has been helping with this with Professor Emily Chen. And we have one more, the IRDR from ICoE from Fudan on the climate change, climate extremes, and One Health. Yesterday on the ANSO DR steering committee, there's a consultation on the research agenda, closed door. And this we have today, risk science for resilient cities. And we will have one from Africa, Peri-Peri-U is preparing one, and the Japan National Committee is preparing an important meeting. And we have a Colombia National Committee is also preparing one. And hopefully we also have a young scientist meeting. Next one. Yes, next one, please. So the IRDR Scientific Committee has developed a simple template, and thanks to the leadership of Dr. Riyanti, has put the three three simple questions, which is not that easy to answer, but I hope that this meeting will give your input, your comment, and advice. The first is about the changing global, regional, and the national risk landscape. The second is about identification of three major research priorities referring to the global research agenda. Then, very importantly, the implementation of the research agenda and the science in actions. Because we have to, it doesn't make much sense if we just develop an agenda or a document, but without thinking how this can be implemented. And after all, what we are talking about is to mobilize the science for solutions and for actions. And then there's a fourth question, that is where you can put your very open, frank opinions about the whole global research agenda in totality or in some part of this document, because these are supposed to be owned and shared and carried out by all. Next one. I ended it here, and this is the 2018 the Disaster Day, International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. I said that at the time, I said the IRDR community will have to pursue the DRR integrated research, which is very much in line with the new research agenda now, with all for disaster risk reduction, but also for the development safety, which I really see all we do is for the development safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Han. And I'm very sorry we had the technical problem, but I really commend you and Professor Rajib for demonstrating how resilient we can be
Yeah.
Despite this one. May I invite everyone in the panel here, Dr. Nuraini, Professor Manju, to switch on your cameras. So we'll go into the discussion session. We will start with Professor Manju, who is leading our satellite office for the Asian ANGST, what we call ANGST in New Delhi, from IIT in Delhi, India. Professor Manju, would you care to make your intervention?
Yes, thank you, Professor Joy. I'm very delighted to hear the talks by 3 distinguished speakers and to really meet all the panelists and the invited guests and attendees. Very good afternoon to all of you. I think as the clue provided by the previous speakers, that urbanization is very, very important and should be a key to the risk assessment, management, and reduction, and so on. And the second, I think, important aspect is the extreme weather, which is, as per the previous speakers' list of risk, it is number 3. And also, it's very, I think it's very well recognized that the exposure has now increased tremendously because of urbanization. So my suggestions would be that we need to enhance and also accelerate the efforts for the regional modeling for the extreme weather in the context of urbanization. Currently we know very well that that the urbanization has impacted in no uncertain ways the thermal stress, the extreme rainfall, the thunderstorm activities. That's what some of our latest research showed, and also fog and the pollution events. Now, so I think there has to be efforts in 2 directions. One, I would say that the forecast of extreme weather timely is very, very important for any kind of a risk assessment or risk management. And secondly, in the context of urbanization, definitely sustainable development goals shall be implemented. But I will also like to recommend more on the technology front. On the technology front, definitely latest technologies have come which can reduce emissions of any kind. For example, I'll just give 2 or 3 examples of growing urban forests in a very short period of time, or having specific insulators, glasses, and materials which can reduce warming, etc. That's on the technology front. But on the regional modeling front, definitely my 3, I think, recommendations would be to have a lot of cross-sectoral collaborations with socio-economic and health and other experts. Also enhance the modeling, regional modeling efforts with the international groups to have more frequent model comparisons to improve the predictions and the forecast and sharing of data and the capabilities. And the third is the capacity building. I think capacity building is very, very important for the extreme weather. It's a new science, I would say, because natural weather phenomena are now, I think, very much much better understood and much better predicted. But still, the extreme weather science is really new to us, and we really need to go a long way forward to really understand and do some good research in this. I think with this, I would like to close my remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Manju, for joining us from IIT Delhi in India. Next, I call upon Professor Johnny Chan, our ANGST co-director from the City University of Hong Kong. Professor Chan? I think you have to unmute, Professor Chan. We can't hear you.
Mute, Professor.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
So thank you very much for inviting me to this important forum. And so I like to start by saying that so far we've been talking about the risk, but one point that seems to be not mentioned significantly, which is actually in the topic, is resilience. So how do we include resilience into the whole equation? So we heard from Dr. Jenty that how we calculate risk, but in the risk calculation that we saw, there was actually no consideration of resilience, which obviously is very important in the whole discussion of risk. So I think we need to somehow include whatever city or place the resilience into the equation. And we've been doing some of that work of that. So that's the point number one that perhaps Professor Rajib Shaw saw my students. He was one of my students' external examiner, and obviously you could make some comments on the inclusion of the resilience term in the equation. So that's number one. And number two is that I like to follow up on Professor Manju's point about urbanization. And as we all know that with urbanization, the impact of extreme events, extreme weather events, can be even more disastrous, and that includes flooding and tropical cyclones and so on. So we have seen recently about and of course that's not, and we also saw in the presentation of Professor Han about the snowstorms in the US and so on. So I think these extreme events impact the impact of these extreme events on cities is actually in some sense underestimated at the moment. And the reason for this is because you have not really considered the resilience of the city. Some cities are more resilient, but some cities are really not prepared for this type of extreme events, which we expect to occur more frequently with climate change. So to do this, there was some discussion about uncertainty, and I think that is very important. Give me a minute. My office has this motion sensor, so it turns itself off. So give me 10 seconds.
Okay, Professor Chan will.
So saving energy.
Yeah.
To save energy, we have this motion sensor. I'm sitting here and I'm not doing anything, so therefore it switches itself off. Anyway, so coming back to what I'm talking about is the uncertainty in terms of the risk and the disaster. And that leads to the question about how do we make better probability forecasts. So right now, most of the predictions, we say, okay, well, there's going to be so much rain, or there's going to be so much snow, or the tropical cyclone is going to hit a certain place. But there is an uncertainty in this. So we need to understand this uncertainty. Not only should scientists understand the uncertainties, but the government or disaster preparedness people need to understand what uncertainty means. And so in designing disaster reduction or disaster preparedness actions, you need to understand what uncertainty means, and then how you can design actions that can accommodate this type of uncertainty in the planning. And that of course comes back to the science part of it, which is to improve on our ability to provide better uncertainty estimates and so on. So that's the second point. Now the third point is that in understanding and calculating the risk and so on, one very important point is about the data that we have. And quite often when we want to estimate the risk with vulnerability and exposure and all that stuff, one difficulty that often occurs is that we don't have the data to estimate, to calculate to look at the real exposure, to look at the real vulnerability, to look at the and so on. So data availability becomes very important in the whole equation in estimating risk. And so I think it's very important that we need to push for more openness in terms of data, or at least the availability to researchers and government in terms of making the data available. So I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chan. We'll get Dr. Kirsch-Wood and Professor Han will be responding in the end after we get through our very quick comments from Professor Mazlan Othman, our partner from the International Science Council. Professor, you have the platform, Professor Mazlan. Is she in the call?
Yes, yes.
Yes,
Okay.
I am.
Yes, okay, great.
Everyone. On and off, I also got internet problems here because it's raining and there's thunder and lightning. So yes, I'm very pleased to hear all the interventions that actually I didn't hear all, but I was so happy to see Rajib dive in when he needed to. Congratulations. You know, with the ISC, IRDR has been a very strong partner of ours, particularly through the IRDR ICoE Taipei, and also, of course, through ICoE-SEADPRI. And all the issues you are dealing with today have been magnificently handled by these two organizations, as I said, who are our strongest partners. I can't say anything substantive at the moment, Joy, so let me listen a bit more and then maybe towards the end I'll say something. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to Dr. Afroz Ahmad Shah from Brunei Darussalam. Dr. Afroz, maybe you have some thoughts, you want to make a quick intervention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joy, for inviting me. And I'm very pleased to listen to all the speakers, and it was like, you know, it was inspirational for me. In terms of what I can learn from all the discussion that we had so far, is that the risk is, I mean, it's a huge task on all of us. And if you, for example, if I give you the, I'm from the geological background, so if I give you the geological hazards in terms of the risk what we have in Southeast Asia, when it was the tsunami in 2004 hit, and we were not really expecting the tsunami, and then we had the big tsunami signs came after that. So what it tells us that any hazard that comes out, basically it is an awakening call for us. We actually start taking an action afterwards. And I don't want that, that thing to happen after this forum, because our motivation should be that we actually first map all the hazards, and then we start thinking about in what's going to happen in future. For example, the COVID, we were not really expecting COVID. In fact, if you ask the infectious people who are actually, the experts in infection disease, they were actually telling us before this that there is a possibility that there will be a biological, there will be a virus is going to come. You have to get prepared. So the healthcare system, as you can see in the world where we had the healthcare system was not really well equipped, those are the regions that have got really big risks. The question was that we did not learn from the past. So therefore, for me, I mean, as a geologist, we have seen the Earth from the beginning. It is actually, the hazard is good for us because it's an evolutionary system. We've seen worse than what you see now. I mean, if you look at the geological past, so we cannot stop it. It is the nature of our planet, how it is. We can't stop risk. We can't stop an earthquake from coming. We can't stop a volcano from erupting. But what we can learn is that it is a lesson for us how to live with hazards. And I think this is very important for all of us to know how we're going to deal with it. So for that, I think the education is extremely important. Like you have to educate people. There are still people who say the vaccination is bad. So they have a huge population of people who say the earthquake hazards are just coming because of some problem, right? So you have to educate people. You have to understand what the science. So I think the basic element for that is educate people. Go to the if the government is unable to do it, we have to be the we have to be in the forefront to come and help them. And if there is a problem, we have to all as an international group come together and then clean that problem from the beginning. I think as I told you from my background, when I work in field, I see this a lot. Like there is a huge gap between science in the journals and the science on ground. And I think that's one of the motivation that I'm here is because there is a huge gap. So I want to narrow that gap, and with your help, with all of us, we can move forward and we can definitely win that battle.
Thank you, Dr. Afroz, for reminding us that we need to bring science into action. We'll go on to our, before bringing on our two speakers, our last, we have two more interventions. I'll call upon Dr. Rahma and then Professor Saini, and then we will go back to our keynote speakers for their round of closing remarks. Can I call upon Dr. Rahma?
Thank you, Moderator Professor Joy, Dr. Jenty, Kirsch, and Prof. Qunli, distinguished speaker, guests, and participants. Good afternoon, everyone, and greeting from Indonesia. It is such an honor and pleasure to be invited to this forum. I much enjoyed talk from Dr. Jenty and Prof. Qunli on the importance of risk science as a fundamental to address DRR and climate crisis to support SDGs. And Prof. Qunli has also shared, together with Prof. Rajib, the lesson learned from the 10 years IRDR that has highlighted that intensive amount of scientific research and progress achieved in DRR and climate change over the past decade must be balanced with a more effective collaboration in bridging between science, policy, practice, between knowledge producer and potential knowledge users. This indicates the crucial need for capacity building for the next generation of youth and young professionals to be able to bridge the gap of scientific research into action and policy in the next 10 years ahead, and a need to deepen research and knowledge on the complex dimension of risk science, global risk landscape, disaster science, disaster technology, and disaster governance to support sustainable development. Youth and young professionals within the UNDRR network have shown their motivation and determination in contributing to DRR and climate change using science, technology, engineering, and innovation. For example, in a more effective research and analyzing data and information, risk communication, art design and development of innovative low-cost technology and tools, applying science and technology advancement for local action that directly contribute to the community, and supporting evidence-based policymaking and advocacy based on data. UNDRR Alliance is a network of youth and young professionals in Asia and the Pacific working in science, technology, engineering, and innovation to support disaster and climate resilience. We are part of the 2.9 billion young people between the age of 15 to 39 years, which means 38% of the global population today. One could imagine the immense potentials to the acceleration processes and how powerful it could significantly move changes if given space and opportunities. Disaster often requires rapid response and adaptation of modern technology, which is also sensitive to each different local and social context. In the case of developing countries, where adaptation of new technologies is somehow difficult, we as young people embody the much needed abilities to bridge the gap between new and conventional techniques, such as the Internet of Things and information technology that are led by indigenous communities and partnering with the young and eager minds. Young people are often innovators in the use of ICT. Young people in the local community can contribute to the data collection and information sharing through citizen science that includes collection of volunteer geographic information, utilization of mobile networks and application, and taking street-level imagery, data availability, and information sharing in risk science that is crucial. Young people can help to bridge the gap between community and policymakers by acting as the conduit in this initiative. UNDRR national chapters has already shown their capacity to mobilize young people to conduct data collection, for example, through UAV mappings. This allows young people at every corner to take part in building resilience of cities. With this in mind, 4 key recommendations from the young people for the novel proposal on the global agenda for DRR and risk-informed development issue locally and globally are: the first is encouraging youth and young professionals and providing institutional space for them to be involved in the decision-making process by having young representatives with adequate responsibilities in UN bodies, national and regional and international bodies. The second, the need for greater space for connection, promoting dialogue, networking, and young people transdiscipline collaboration to work together in the region. This collaboration would empower young people roles in and undertaking transboundary issues, promoting dialogue and bridging information gaps from global to local and local to global. Third, capacity building for young people by extending scholarships and research funding to pursue higher education, research, and community engagement programs. And fourth, seed funding to nurture innovation in resilience building oriented business and promoting social and science entrepreneurship, providing opportunity for scaling up businesses and enterprise for youth, social innovators or entrepreneurs, opportunity for marketing the innovation, and mobilizing DRR social entrepreneurship in the region by promoting partnership and creating appropriate conditions for scaling up. In thinking about the future or risk, one of our upcoming activities in focusing on future literacy and DRR, together with UNESCO Jakarta, UNDRR, UNDP, and UNESCO Future Literacy, we plan to engage young people and provide training in future literacy, an essential skill for youth to move forward. As what Prof. Jenny mentioned, risk will always be there, and we need the skills to better anticipate and plan for it. We deeply thank the acknowledgement to empower youth and young professionals engagement for the panelists to this forum. UNDRR Alliance will continue its commitment to UN efforts, developing close partnership with other major groups within the global process and empower the engagement of young people leadership in the new normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rahma, for that, and in emphasizing the need for us to make space for youth and young professionals. May I go to our last person who, last expert who will give an intervention, Professor Saini, who is the Secretary of AP STAG.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much, Joy. First, I have to again thank the host for inviting me to this forum. I'm really happy and honored to be here. And all of our colleagues, they have already mentioned so many interesting and critical points. Here, I think I just want to keep my intervention short. I want to address on one specific point, that is, we really need to initialize the complex science-based disaster risk research. The reason I want to address on this point is because the current world is so interlinked, interdependent, or even hyper-connected. We notice that a lot of new emerging risk actually comes from this complication. So I think we really need to put this complex science-based research in priority, because this can help us to find out the critical linkage, to find out the weakest link. And I think this type of research will probably lay a base for our policy making, to give us some guidance on what are the prioritized actions, stakeholders, and also research focus. I believe that this type of research will give us a guide in this new paradigm. Yeah, that's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Saini. Yeah, I now give our keynote speakers a chance to respond to any issues that they feel compelled to do. starting with Professor Kirsch-Wood.
Thank you very much. I will be brief because I think for Professor Qunli, he will have a little bit more in terms of the actual agenda. No, I think these are excellent points, and I really appreciate the richness of the discussion. And maybe just to reassure, I think colleagues like Dr. Manju and Dr. Afras, I think that certainly there is a very, very strong need for improved, continually improving our modeling capacity, looking at how different risks can be understood, looking at technological solutions. I don't think that by taking a more holistic approach, you are undermining the importance that that probability understanding or looking at conceptual models can bring to these sorts of discussions. But I think the real point here is that I think you also said, Dr. Chan, that it's important to also understand what uncertainty means and to recognize the limit of those models. And so in the points around things like better understanding complexity science, you know, we need to be clear, we cannot predict the future. And the idea that we will be able to fully model every eventuality in a complex world is not realistic. And you see sometimes that in the climate debate of people sort of saying we can't act because our climate models aren't accurate enough. And this is not a constructive way forward. They are accurate enough to be able to make a good basket of decisions that needs to be flexible, that needs to have some redundancy or some flexibility, some resilience, if I may, to, you know, within that system. But we know very, very much enough to be able to act. And of course, it's always better when those systems improve. But at the same time, we also need to recognize that the idea that there will be a single priority or a single good action that emerges from those models is not realistic. And in that sense, I think there are many opportunities to look at this from a number of different lenses and to have effective solutions that evolve over time. And I couldn't agree more that youth, you are the clarity, and you see consistently now that many youth voices are central to promoting effective action in these areas. And so I think it's central that you're involved. And also because many of the decisions the political decisions that come from the science will be affecting your pensions, your children's prospects. And I think it's absolutely essential that you ask the right questions to your governments now of, if I make a pension contribution, can you make sure that it will still be there and that we will have a resilient society in 2050? And there are many youth, younger people who are making very effective arguments. You need to look at people like Luisa Neubauer in the German parliament to recognize just how effective some of those voices are becoming. So very much excited to work with you and to see these networks generated. And I would hand over to Professor Qunli Han, who I think can speak more a little bit to some of the specific recommendations. Thank you.
Go ahead, Professor Han.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Pereira. Thank you so much for all the very enlightening the questions and suggestions, recommendations. I'm sure that Professor Pereira, your team will be able to put it into a good summary that I'm sure the drafting group of the research agenda will benefit from it, as well that we expect the output of this meeting will be reported at the conference in June. So I think in a broader group that for discussion, very rich, very useful. Hearing all this, the common suggestions, and also from those questions posted on the chat box, I somehow feel that it is more that we will need to continue a mission that UNDRR and IC started 10 years ago. But if you look at the original idea of the IRDR, that is to have a much better understanding of the complex and underlying causes of the risk, and then to improve the decision making and policy making with make it more scientifically sound. Scientifically, by that is also have the social, the human aspect, the science in it, and then putting the knowledge in action. This certainly, to me, I don't think the 10 years time is enough for a scientific community to accomplish such a mission. In fact, we are having this mission in a kind of a changing risk landscape, which make it more challenging. So I think that I think there's a need to see the much stronger capacity and the collaboration with all the teams together for such a new challenge. Then there's many colleagues that talk about the uncertainty. I fully agree that we will never be able to have the situation that we have a zero uncertainty or zero risk. That is certainly not going to happen. With the at the same time, with the mobilization of the science powers, science brains, technologies, education, and social engagement, and the policymakers, I think we can somehow minimize or reduce the uncertainty, which is growing, in fact, because of the complexities, interconnectivities that the world we have. So we need to have a stronger science, technology, social science mission, social innovation. I think yesterday, Professor Rajib Shaw made this very interesting, important remark, which I kept thinking that we need to, for the future IRDR, to think of how we can, from the social aspect, to look at this DRR as an enterprise and how we can move ahead on that. Then, just to be sure, then I see, I want to conclude that to re-emphasize my view. What we are talking about the risk or risk reduction or risk science. In fact, as also partially reflected in the document, it says that it argued the risk reduction is actually a mainstream issue of development. We can no longer pursue a development, building things, constructing things without having a risk or safety as the goal at the same time. So it is kind of a change of a culture of development. This, I think, is a time to push forward to that, so that we don't just look at the, the sudden or this unusual event as such. We are looking at a main development cultural change. I will conclude my remarks here. Professor.
Thank you, Professor Han. So I would just like to throw a challenge to all the young people here before I go to the closing by Professor Rajib, that the young, you have so much of energy, and Dr. Riyanti has already mentioned about the changing risk landscape in Southeast Asia, how with global warming of 1.5 degrees, we are now at 1.2 degrees already. So we expect more extreme events, and the IPCC has actually mentioned that Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific is going to be the highest impacted regions in terms of economic growth as well as well-being. So we have had a rich discussion, and the youth, I think, in Southeast Asia have to need to get together and form perhaps their UN-inspired ASEAN. This is the challenge I throw to all of you. And I just want to inform you that we will be documenting all inputs until in a week's time. You have an email that has been put in. So please put your suggestion in so that we can transmit this to the Global Research Agenda drafting team. and we can get our presence in the global research agenda. So with that, I would like to invite Professor Rajib, who has given us, shown us how resilient we should be, to say a few closing words. Yeah. Prof. Rajib,
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Joy. I see already in the chat box your challenge is accepted by Sufyan, and maybe there will be more people who will accept your challenge by this young group. So thank you. I think it was a very interesting session, and one research agenda will not be able to cover everything. And my stake is that like research agenda is always like it's a doing by learning effort. We set a research agenda now from the 10 years down the line, but we don't know that 10 years from now, what will be the state of the world? What are the new risks which are coming? We are all anticipating. So the most important part of the research agenda, I think the flexibility and the adaptability, Joy knows it much better, adaptive governance. So how we make this research agenda more flexible, adaptive, and it has to adjust based on the changing context, based on the changing research landscape, and so on. But I would like to take a couple of points, especially on focusing on today's topic, which is the resilient cities. And definitely the resilient cities should be, at least there is no doubt that it should be one of the key pillar of the research agenda, possibly a key cross-cutting pillar of all the different themes which have been already given in the research agenda. I say that the cities are the concentration of risk, but it is also the potential of innovation. And to me, I think this risk and combination of this risk and innovation makes a city more resilient. So when you talk about the resilient, we need to think about both the positive side as well as the negative side. Like what we are seeing, the current COVID-19 crisis, like the cities are the global hotspot. What is happening now in India, all these like major cities like Delhi, the capital region, Mumbai, the financial capital, Bangalore, the so-called the IT hub of India. So all these cities have been tremendously affected, and the whole healthcare system, the primary healthcare system, have failed. So when you talk about the city's resilience, I think in the future, unless we address the urban health as a very important topic, I think it's a very, very key. It will be a key, not only just for this pandemic, but for the longer term, that how we discuss the urban health issues in our research agenda, and how we think about the risk governance part, because many times we see at the city level, there is a governance failure. So the decision-making failure. So I think these two topics, the first is the urban health and the disaster risk governance. I think this should be one of the future pillar of the resilient cities approach. So that's number one. Number two is what we are seeing here nowadays, like more cities are not just city administrative boundary. Like it has a very strong interrelation with the cities and the rural area. So I think the urban-rural, this partnership becomes very, very important, or urban-rural linkage becomes very important. And it is very important for different types of resource sustainability, whether we call it the food, energy, water nexus, like the FEW nexus. So it has been a very popular mechanism at different level. We have possibly not thought about the FEW nexus more on the resilience perspective or the disaster risk reduction perspective. But I think what we are going through for last 1.5 years through the pandemic, it again shows us the importance of the urban-rural connectivity. So that part possibly again should be somewhere inculcated in some of the future research agenda. Then another important thing is that like our cities are always prone to the shocks and the stresses. Like initially we were talking about this pandemic as it's a shock, but now what we are experiencing, that it's already 1.5 years. So it's no more shocks anymore. It's a stress. It's a very strong stress, and we don't know that what will be the future, whether it will over in another 1 year, 1.5 years, we don't know what will be the new variant coming up. So we have to live through this balance between shocks and stresses. But similarly, for the climate incidents also, like what we are seeing, the climate stress, like the water stress, for example, in the cities has been a major problem. And this term called urban drought has been quite popular in these days. We made a book a couple of years back on urban drought by bringing some of the experiences from Asia Pacific region. And our analysis shows that like it is going, like it's not going to be solved unless there are many different approaches. Some are possibly the governance related approach. Some are possibly more on the citizens' perspective or being a more responsible citizen approach. So it's a combination of many different things. So my this third point would be like how we see this balance between stress and shocks in the resilient cities approach. So in Qunli's initial slide, so there was this mention of the global science technology roadmap, and our colleagues in the science technology, scientific committee in IRDR, they were very much part of the science technology roadmap development. We were very fortunate to have lots of young scientists who actually put lots of emphasis or lots of inputs in the science technology roadmap development. So that actually brings again, as Professor Joy Pereira also mentioned, about the importance of the youth and the young professionals in developing, like we use this term very often, like co-designing to co-delivery. So similarly, this research agenda also needs to be like co-designed and co-delivered by the young scientist and the young professional. In that way, I think Rahma, your role and your U-Inspire's role will be very, very prominent in the development stage of the research agenda, but also to implement that in future. So, and we are very confident that you have a very strong network, very motivated people at least in the region. But what I would also like to see that this is not only, although we are talking about this Asia Pacific region for the time being, but there are also unexplored region. Like we have some very good African young scientists in the IRDR network, but possibly don't actually explore that particular potential. So how we have that type of cross-regional collaboration with the broader umbrella of the U-Inspire, I think that will be very, very important. And my last point is, for last a few years of my own experience in the science technology advocacy, I think that the global, regional, up to national level, we have been somehow been able to make, I won't say that it's a big change, but at least certain level of sensitization that yes, science-based decision-making is important. But where it is lacking still, I think at the local government, at the city level. Of course, there are examples. I don't say that there is no cities who are taking advice from the science technology group, but I think we often still lack the science technology advice at the local government or at the city government level, and where it really matters, where it really is valuable, and you can see the impact of what are advices you are given. So somewhere possibly in future, when you talk about the research agenda's actual implementation, I think bringing it down to the local level and the city level is very, very important. So yes, so those are some of my thoughts. And once again, I'm very much thankful to all the speakers and the discussions today. Big thanks to IRDR with great leadership of Qunli, with Riyanti, for shaping this research agenda. Of course, John Handmar, we initially invited him for this particular meeting, but he was not available. So yeah, unfortunately, but thank you very much. Thank you very much also, Jenty, for giving this larger, broader perspective from the UNDRR. I personally learned a lot, and thank you, Professor Joy, for giving me this opportunity. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Professor Rajib, for that closing. So with that, because we are actually way over time, we have to, our Muslim colleagues will have to break fast. So you have the opportunity to actually give your written comments to the email. And risk and opportunity are two sides of the same coin, people. that was emphasized and many times over. And I think we should look at this opportunity to reduce the underlying vulnerability in cities. Let's draw on the energy of our youth and young professionals. And remember, all of us in the panel are young at heart. So we are forever young as far as we are concerned. So with that, I wish you all Selamat Hari Raya Aidilfitri to all of those non-Muslims, our friends, our Muslim colleagues are celebrating the Hari Raya next week, and we wish them a good religious, spiritual experience in this difficult time of movement control order. So our hearts are with you as you do your celebration. So thank you, everybody, and we wish you all well. So take care and be safe. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Real pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you to all our speakers and our logistics people as well. As usual, I forget the brilliant people who do the job